My wife is in private practice pediatrics. She walks into the office on a weekend day. It's busy. She's helping the nurse give vaccines. There's a 4-month-old sitting on her mother's lap while my wife is drawing a vaccine up into a syringe. While she's drawing it up into the syringe, the 4-month-old has a seizure, goes on to have a permanent seizure disorder, epilepsy, and is dead at age 5 of a chronic neurological condition. If she had given that vaccine 5 minutes earlier, I think there is no amount of data that would have convinced her that it wasn't the vaccine that did it. I think the problem that we face is that we deal with numbers, and numbers are numbing. It's, like the old Stalin line, 1 death is a tragedy and 1 million deaths is a statistic. I think we have to try and make it clear what these viruses look like when they infect you, what it feels like to be infected, what it means to die from influenza, which is basically you die of suffocation. It's a brutal death.
Welcome to Health Frontiers with Dr. Bob. I'm Dr. Bob, and we are in for another exciting show. Today, our show is going to be very, very timely and about vaccines, their development, their use, and probably most of the controversy surrounding them. This is a very important topic, and I'm going to introduce our expert, who is Dr. Paul Offit, who is the director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, as well as the Maurice R. Hillman Professor of Vaccinology and a professor of pediatrics at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Offit is currently a voting member on the FDA's Vaccine Advisory Committee for immunization practices to the CDC. He is also the co-inventor of the rotavirus vaccine, known as Rotatech, recommended for universal use in infants by the CDC in 2006 and by the WHO, or World Health Organization, for those of you who don't know who that is, in 2013. This vaccine was estimated recently to save about 165,000 lives a year. He is also the author of 11 books written for the public about science, medicine, and vaccines. So I'm very excited to have Dr. Paul A. Offit on the show today, and we're going to really talk about a very, very important topic due to the fact that there's so much controversy about vaccines, whether they should be used, whether they should be developed, and so on and so forth, because of the current state of the Health and Human Services Secretary and his new staff. So, Paul, welcome to the show. And let me just start with the history of vaccines. How have vaccines shaped public health outcomes in the USA over the last century? There's a lot of lay people that are going to be watching this show, as well as professionals. And really, just give us a snippet of how vaccines have shaped public health.
So in the late 1800s, we lived till about 35. Now, we live to sort of the mid-70s to the early 80s, and vaccines have everything to do with that. Vaccines have saved hundreds of millions of lives. They were first introduced in the early 1800s with the smallpox vaccine, and then we've had a series of vaccines leading up to the present that have protected us against diseases like pneumonia and meningitis and sepsis and paralysis caused by polio and suffocation caused by diphtheria. So vaccines have saved our lives.
That's extraordinarily true. And vaccines for polio, smallpox, and others taught us a lot about public trust, a lot of which has eroded over the past several years, and adoption of medical science to the science of keeping us all healthy and alive. So we're going to be discussing new modalities such as the messenger RNA vaccine that all of us in medicine are familiar with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the lessons that we have were very, very important. In 2026, can you tell me what are the biggest gaps in vaccination coverage? And you can bring the HHS secretary and the different agencies like the CDC and the FDA in about coverage across different demographic or geographic populations. And with that, I mean, starting with the pediatric groups, the kids, parents are scared to death about vaccines now, and the elderly population. Could you comment on that?
Well, so in February of 2025, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was sworn in as Secretary of Health and Human Services. He has, for 20 years, been an anti-vaccine activist and science denialist. And he brought his anti-activism into the realm of public health.
Mm,
He'd gone from activist to public health policymaker.
right.
And it's caused, he has specifically caused an enormous erosion in faith in vaccines. As a consequence, last year, 2025, we had a measles outbreak where we saw more cases than we'd seen in more than 30 years. We had 2 little girls die of measles, healthy little girls that die of measles when we hadn't seen a measles death since 2003, more than 20 years ago. We had 3 total people die of measles, which equaled the total number of measles deaths over the last 25 years. In 2025, we saw more tetanus cases than we'd seen in 10 years. We had 13 children die of whooping cough, which again, were states were seeing whooping cough deaths that hadn't seen them in years. And we had last year about 290 children die of flu. And this year so far, another 100 children have died of flu. We haven't seen numbers like that since the last flu pandemic. So there's been an erosion in trust. As a consequence, there's been an erosion in vaccine rates, and our children are suffering.
I'm aghast at those the data that you just gave. I'm just like Jackie Gleason used to be. I don't know what to say because that's so extraordinary and it's so underreported by the media. I mean, would you agree with that? I mean, the media seems to be afraid to come out and say this is charlatanism and this is really against public health and this is killing people.
I think certainly there are media outlets that have said that. I think the problem is they're just shouting from the sidelines. We all are.
Yeah.
I mean, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the one who's in power. And until that changes, this is going to continue to erode.
Well, I'm hoping that changes maybe before the end of President Trump's tenure as president. So what do we do about this? How do we tackle hesitancy for vaccination? I mean, I have children who have grown to adulthood, but I mean, a lot of parents have little kids and they're very, very reluctant now to have their kids vaccinated. And we know that there are underserved or historically marginalized communities such as the Seventh-day Adventists, the Hasidics, who don't believe in vaccination. And of course, that has helped some of these epidemics go forward. Do you have any way that we can tackle the kind of hesitancy that we're seeing among the public?
Right. So I think there are 2 things that work against vaccines. One is that vaccines are a victim of their own success. I mean, I'm a child of the early 1950s. I had measles, I had mumps, I had German measles, I had chickenpox. I had all those diseases. I remember what they're like.
Yeah.
We eliminated measles from this country by the year 2000. My children not only don't see measles today, they didn't really grow up with measles. So they don't really know how sick or dead that virus can make you. So I think that's one, is that we do ask a lot of parents. We ask them to, in the first few years of life, give vaccines to prevent 14 different diseases. That can mean as many as 26 inoculations during that time. It can mean as many as 5 shots at one time to prevent diseases most people don't see, using biological fluids most people don't understand. That, in combination with what is a flood of misinformation that is readily available on the internet, and and there's a lot of money behind that. Groups like the Informed Consent Action Network has millions of dollars. In fact, there's one lawyer they hire who gets bad information out there that they pay $6 million a year to. The Children's Health Defense has tens of millions of dollars supporting them. So the misinformation business is good. The information business isn't quite as good. So it's hard to fight all this.
Yeah, and social media doesn't help. I mean, I hear all the time from my patients who are all adults that they have, second thoughts about getting their kids and their grandchildren immunized because of all the misinformation that is out there. This is really a real emergency of sorts in medical affairs. And so I think that this show in particular, because of all of this, is extraordinarily important. And I want to tell our viewing audience that if you like, and would you like and subscribe to this program? And I'm interested in hearing from all of you out there in the comment section, which is below. So, Paul, let's go on to talk about science versus misinformation. What strategies do you recommend to combat misinformation about vaccines, especially in social media. Now, we know that the corporations that make the vaccines are making tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in developing these vaccines, and it's costing them a lot of money. But that is often used as the excuse. It's a corporate means of hurting young people, young children. That's one of the strategies. So this misinformation is horrible. So what strategies do you recommend to combat the misinformation that we're seeing everywhere?
I mean, certainly the pharmaceutical industry has at times acted aggressively and unethically and sometimes legally. But in the world of vaccines, there is no hiding. I mean, if you, for example, misrepresent a vaccine or omit information when you submit a vaccine for licensure and then ultimately recommendation by the CDC, there's no hiding. I mean, there's the vaccine adverse events reporting system. There's the vaccine safety data link, which will very quickly pick up rare, including incredibly rare side effects. And so, for example, I mean, the mRNA COVID vaccines made by Moderna and Pfizer were very quickly picked up to have myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle as a side effect. It was rare, maybe about 1 in 50,000 overall, but real.
Yes.
And then look at Johnson & Johnson's COVID vaccine, which was authorized in February of 2021, was found to be an extremely rare cause of clotting, roughly 1 in 250,000, but including clotting of the brain, including fatal clotting of the brain.
Right.
That was, again, quickly picked up and ultimately drove that vaccine off the market. So there is no hiding if you're a pharmaceutical industry in the world of vaccines. In fact, I wish this was also true on the drug side. I mean, if there was a drug safety data link like there's a vaccine safety data link, we probably would have picked up Vioxx as a cause of heart attacks much quicker.
Yeah, that's correct. And that was, I have to say, a very, very effective Merck product for arthritis. I'm a rheumatologist and an immunologist, and I regret that that was removed and often suggested a black box should have been put around that drug, and it should have been kept because it was extremely rare. So these strategies, I'm really alarmed at the misinformation that's out there because I hear about it every day. So how do you engage healthcare professionals? How do people in our own profession with evidence-based discussions come out and tell the public what we really think about this misinformation?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think the war is being fought at the level of social media. And so there are a number of groups that try and put good information out there. We're one of them. The Vaccine Education Center at Children's Hospital Philadelphia is there to try and answer all those claims that are put out there about vaccines, whether it's aluminum adjuvants or whether it's, DNA fragments that are in some biologicals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that. But I do think it's also this war is being fought at the level of where the physician meets the parent, and I think the physician needs to understand that parents are scared. They're legitimately scared. You can't put aside the fact that they are scared. But I think you try and slowly and compassionately and passionately and compellingly go through the data that I think alleviates their fears. And I think most pediatricians do. Remember, most parents support vaccines. I mean, more than 90% of parents vaccinate their children, independent of whether they're Republican or Democrat or independent. And so Robert F. Kennedy Jr. doesn't represent most parents. And so I think you have that going for you.
And you do agree that politics has entered this whole fray, and there's not much that can be done, or do you think that something can be done? Now, I would say that Robert Kennedy has populated, and having been through the pandemic, as all of us have, that his appointees have been less than unbiased with regard to vaccination. The CDC director, the NIH director, and the FDA director are all, I dare say, friends of his and people who believe in what he believes in. So do you believe that politics, this is a dumb question actually, that politics has played a major role? And how can we control this? Do you think at the end of Trump's term that when Kennedy is replaced, everything will revert back to common sense?
Well, you're seeing the effect. I mean, with regard to measles or whooping cough or flu deaths, I mean, you're seeing the effect, and parents are upset about this. And I think of interest, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been asked to stop talking about vaccines. I mean, to focus more on foods and that sort of that part of the Make America Healthy Again movement, and to not talk about vaccines. And also, interestingly, you probably know this, but there was on March 16th a lawsuit that went to a federal court in Boston where the American Academy of Pediatrics and 5 other medical and scientific organizations sued the Department of Health and Human Services and sued Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for what they believe had been an onslaught against vaccines and in terms of bad information, in terms of taking some vaccines off the recommended schedule. And they won that lawsuit.
That's
so
great.
Essentially, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, which was fired by RFK Jr. when it had the experts back in June and replaced by, you're right, sort of people like him who had an anti-vaccine, anti-science bias are now gone.
Right.
And all the recommendations that they made, which were anti-science recommendations, have now been overturned. So that's a good sign. We'll see how things move forward. But the courts, I think, helped children here. That was a good day for children on March 16th.
That's incredible. I did not know that select committee, I dare say, of so-called experts was canned because of the lawsuit. That's good news.
Yes, and we'll see what happens. We'll see how things move forward. But RFK Jr. continues to put forward CDC directors who clearly have an anti-vaccine bias. I mean, he has an aversion to experts, aversion to anybody who doesn't have his fixed, immutable, science-resistant beliefs. And until, frankly, he's out of there, I think we're all going to be suffering his madness.
Right. And it all started, I think, in his early days and before he was even appended to the Republican Party when he was talking about autism and vaccines, a debunked fact that all of us in medicine, I mean, every medical doctor, if you don't know about this, then you need to go back to medical school or go somewhere and be re-educated, that the doctor from England who lost his license because he said that vaccines were the cause of autism, which clearly they are not. Would you comment on that? Because that created a big commotion among adults and parents.
You're right. In 1998, a British gastroenterologist named Andrew Wakefield published a paper in The Lancet claiming falsely that the combination of measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine caused autism. It was really just a case series of 8 children who got the vaccine and then had signs and symptoms of autism, so there was no control group. There have since been more than 24 studies, retrospective studies, looking at children who did or didn't get that vaccine to show that there was no increased incidence of autism. But again, it's sort of hard to unscare people. Once you've rung the bell, it's hard to unring it. And RFK Jr. just keeps moving along. It's kind of this whack-a-mole. So he supported the notion that the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine caused autism. Then he said thimerosal, this ethyl mercury-containing preservative in vaccines, caused autism when 10 studies showed that it didn't. Now he's of the notion that maybe aluminum adjuvants cause autism, when in fact there was an excellent study in Denmark that showed that wasn't true. He got President Trump to stand up at a media event and say that Tylenol taken in the first trimester increased the incidence of autism, which also wasn't true. I mean, he just goes from one thing to the next with unabashed enthusiasm and never, ever admits that he's wrong.
And you're absolutely right. It is like whack-a-mole because I hear these theories almost every week. There's something new. I just want to alert our audience that please like and subscribe to Health Frontiers with Dr. Bob. And I'm very interested in hearing from all of you. And God knows you probably all have commentary about what we're talking about because this is a very, very serious topic. So let's talk now, Paul, about new frontiers in vaccine technology. Could you explain the future potential of messenger RNA technology? Now, I have to say that I spent a lot of time during the pandemic on national news explaining how messenger RNA vaccines worked. And it was extraordinary for the audience out there to know that most of us on the front lines with COVID-19 were living day to day, wrapped in Tyvek suits, wearing masks, having patients not with their families, having them die without members of their family, and having them talk to their relatives with iPads. It was a terrible time before the messenger RNA vaccine came about. Once that vaccine came about, all of the medical staff, nursing, doctors, aides, technicians lined up to get the mRNA vaccine. So it was a boom. And as far as I know, messenger RNA technology is the way to go in the future. Can you comment on that?
It certainly was the way to go here. I mean, it's really a pretty remarkable story. Here's a virus, SARS-CoV-2, that came into the United States in January 2020, around then, started killing people in February 2020. We isolated the virus, sequenced it, and now we could make a vaccine. And then 11 months later, we had already done 2 large prospective placebo-controlled trials, a 40,000-person trial by Pfizer, 30,000 by Moderna, to show that the vaccine worked and at least at that level was safe with tens of thousands of people being vaccinated. I think it was the most remarkable medical or scientific achievement in my lifetime. In my lifetime, I was born before the polio vaccine.
Yes.
It was amazing. And it was a combination of 3 things. I think one, it was Drew Weissman and Katie Carrico forming a relationship in 1997 where they started to test mRNA as a vaccine platform, for which they won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2023. The other thing was in 2002, 2003, SARS-1 raised its head in Foshan, China, and a group at NIH, National Institutes of Health, headed by Barney Graham, started to make a SARS-1 mRNA vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And although SARS-1 really never came into this country, never caused disease or death in this country, we learned a lot from that effort. And the third thing was President Trump's Operation Warp Speed. I mean, that was an amazing accomplishment. Basically, the administration bet $11 billion on 6 horses to win 1 race. And that really moved it along. They took the risk out of it for pharmaceutical companies. I mean, I think it was the greatest accomplishment of President Trump's first term. He could have called it, Trump warp speed. But I think at his heart, he's a deeply modest man who doesn't like to put his name on things. But I could be wrong about that.
That's great.
So you have that. And so messenger RNA, we'll see. I mean, we'll see whether or not it can be a platform for other things like a better malaria vaccine or a better tuberculosis vaccine or an AIDS vaccine. And we'll see whether it applies to that as well. It certainly was the answer for SARS-CoV-2.
I think messenger RNA has gotten beaten up a bit, but I agree with you. I spent a great deal of time at the Rockefeller University doing research. And I knew that in the labs adjoining our labs, which was immunology, they were working for years on malaria, vaccine for malaria, which is, admittedly, and I think I may be right on this, is probably the most common cause of death in certainly Africa and maybe around the world. So the messenger RNA vaccine for malaria would be a major advance. And you're right, this is a lifetime advance that no one predicted, and it certainly overshadows the GLP-1 advance, which is also in our lifetimes incredibly important. But this messenger RNA platform, this ability to tailor make an immune response to a specific foreign antigen using nucleic acid is extraordinary. And it is just something that I would have never have even considered 30 years ago.
It's amazing. I mean, you have a small piece of genetic material, messenger RNA, that enters a cell where it joins 200,000 other pieces of messenger RNA that are making the proteins and enzymes necessary for life. Yep. It then is translated to a protein. In the case of SARS-CoV-2, it's a SARS-CoV-2 spike protein or fusion protein. And then that protein is made, it's presented to the immune system, and the immune system then makes a response to that protein. And then the genetic material degrades, as is true for all messenger RNA in our cells. And you have an excellent immune response. And it really induces a vigorous immune response. When we started to give that vaccine, what we saw is that some people would have sort of swelling of the lymph node under their arms,
yes,
which is where those immune cells are, and they're being sort of recruited and activated there. I haven't seen that level of response since the smallpox vaccine, which also was a vigorous inducer of the immune response. And I think it's just phenomenal how excellent that was in terms of inducing neutralizing antibodies. Better than what else was it? China, for example, used a whole killed viral vaccine that wasn't nearly as good as this vaccine.
Yeah, and that brings up that whole business that when the Moderna, the Pfizer vaccines, the J&J vaccines came out, and then the Russians tried to produce one as well as the Chinese, as you mentioned, they weren't as effective as Moderna's, Pfizer's, and J&J's. And there was a lot of controversy among adults getting booster shots, particularly adults over the age of 65. And you already have mentioned some of the unfortunate incidents that I see a lot of because I'm, as an immunologist and rheumatologist, we see the post-COVID syndrome, as it were. A lot of that may not be real, but the ones who are real, we do see, and it is a problem. It's a very difficult thing to treat. And with infections, I'm sure you would agree with this, there's a lot of people who believe that their chronic fatigue syndrome, their fibromyalgia, their intractable pain syndromes are related to the messenger RNA vaccine, or any vaccine for that matter. Very reluctant to go there and get that done.
Vaccines are sort of the universal scapegoat.
Right,
Whether it was the human
exactly.
papillomavirus vaccine or the influenza vaccine, people will attribute long-term symptoms to that because to them, it's obvious, right? I was fine. I got this vaccine. Then weeks or months later, I have these symptoms. It must have been the vaccine. But when studies are done looking at vaccinated or unvaccinated groups, it doesn't pan out. So it's not true, but it's hard to, it's hard to argue that because people are very much compelled by personal experiences, even if they're wrong. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. My wife is in private practice pediatrics. She
Right.
walks into the office on a weekend day. It's busy. She's helping the nurse give vaccines. There's a 4-month-old sitting on her mother's lap while my wife is drawing a vaccine up into the syringe. While she's drawing it up into the syringe, the 4-month-old has a seizure, goes on to have a permanent seizure disorder, epilepsy, and is dead at age 5 of a
Oof.
chronic neurological condition. If she had given that vaccine 5 minutes earlier, I think
Yes.
there is no amount of data that would have convinced her that it wasn't the vaccine that did it.
That's an extraordinary story. And you're right. Exactly. Things that are coincidental over science, over medicine for years and years. People having had dinner and eating some sort of Chinese food and then developing Parkinsonism a week later will attribute it to the Chinese food. And that's something that we see all of the time. But with vaccines, it's very, very serious because with social media, that goes out on the wire. And I'm sure there are subgroups of people who just wait for these kinds of events to happen so they can blame it on the vaccines. Have you any idea? I mean, now that we're in messenger RNA, any idea of what the etiology or cause for the layperson out there that's watching, the cause of myocarditis is in those rare cases that get either the myocarditis or the clotting problems? I have been taken to task over those side effects for many, many years. And I have no good answer for physicians or for patients who come to me saying, my father-in-law got this, my mother-in-law has this, and my grandchild has this. How do you handle that?
Well, for clotting, there are a fair amount of data now that have answered that question. There's an activation of something called platelet factor 4, which sort of precipitates a clotting cascade. And there was a recent paper in the New England Journal of Medicine that described how that happened. So yes, on the myocarditis, I don't know. I mean, initially it was thought that while you were responding to this antigen, this SARS-CoV-2, that there was molecular mimicry with the protein on heart muscle cells, but that didn't seem to pan out. So I'm not sure what that is. But the good news is, because we saw that at our hospital, I mean, first of all, the virus causes myocarditis. I mean, we would see something called multi-system inflammatory disease in children,
Oh,
where
yeah.
the child would get COVID,
Very
recover,
serious.
and then
Yes.
come back weeks or sometimes months later with severe pneumonia, hepatitis, myocarditis, 50 to 75% of the time, end up in the intensive care unit and occasionally die of severe myocarditis.
Yeah.
That wasn't the vaccine story. The vaccine caused the myocarditis. It was generally transient, short-lived, and self-resolving. So initially, we would bring those kids into the hospital because we weren't sure what we were seeing, but then we could, from that point on, handle them as outpatients because we realized it was a transient phenomenon.
Yeah.
So the myocarditis caused by the virus could kill you, but the myocarditis caused by the vaccine was a much different animal, much more benign.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Okay. So we know now that there are emerging vaccine platforms, and I don't know how successful they're going to be with Kennedy as the HHS secretary right now, because I think a lot of the pharma companies are very quiet and are approaching, for example, cancer vaccines or other therapeutic vaccines very, very carefully so that they don't sort of ruffle the feathers of the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. because he is so unpredictable. So what do you think of emerging vaccine platforms for these different diseases like cancer or other illnesses?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think the messenger RNA platform has tremendous promise for cancer, autoimmune diseases. But you're right. RFK Jr. has done what he could to limit that technology. I mean, he withdrew $500 million from BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research Development Authority, which also included money for an mRNA bird flu vaccine. And so what we don't have now is something we had, say, with SARS-1, which we talked about earlier, which you learn a lot in the research development phase to see whether or not this would be of value. Now, bird flu may never become a pandemic, but if it does become a pandemic, we would have had all that information going in, and he's taken that away. I think what happened was, I think in the first 2 years of the pandemic, we kind of leaned into this libertarian left hook, where in the first year of the pandemic, before we had a vaccine, when we didn't have antivirals till October of 2020, we didn't have monoclonals till November of 2020, we didn't have vaccines till December of 2020. So all we could do was shutter schools, close businesses, restrict travel, test, mask, quarantine. And that was seen by some as massive government overreach. And the following year, 2021, we had a vaccine, and you couldn't go anywhere without your vaccine card. You couldn't go to your favorite bar, restaurant,
Right.
sporting event. You may be fired from your job.
That's
And
right.
I think that really angered people. And I think the messenger RNA technology got caught up in that anger. I
Yeah.
think that the anti-vaccine activists were very good about, one, convincing us that COVID was no big deal, and two, convincing us that COVID vaccines were dangerous. There's a lot of money behind them to do it, and I think they had a lot of success in doing that, but we're all suffering that misinformation.
Right, right. That's very, very interesting. Now, I just want to bring up an article that we discussed earlier, and that was that the Food and Drug Administration rejected its request to review a newly developed messenger RNA flu shot for people over the age of 50, even though a randomized trial of nearly 41,000 people found that the shot was 27% more effective at preventing illness and 49% more effective at preventing hospitalization than existing flu vaccines. Now, I got my flu vaccine, which was a different, because of my age, a super duper double dose of the vaccine, which is required by all healthcare workers in order to keep your job and work in the hospital. Now, you've told me that this was reversed, because it was manufacturers can produce a messenger RNA shot much more quickly than the old-fashioned vaccines, which we know. But the rejection of Moderna's more effective flu vaccine very likely will wind up killing hundreds and maybe thousands of senior citizens, the aged. But you said that has been reversed. Am I right?
Right. So Moderna did what companies do when they're trying to make a vaccine. They met with the FDA and said, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a prospective controlled trial with our mRNA influenza vaccine. The control will be standard dose flu vaccine. There was some pushback because the standard dose flu vaccine isn't the one that's recommended for people over 65. So the agreement was, okay, then we're just going for the 50 to 64-year-old.
Right.
And that was the deal. And it was written, it was a deal that was made in writing. Then they do this trial. They show, as you said, that the vaccine was 49% more effective at preventing hospitalization. That's great. They submitted to the FDA, and the guy at the time who was the head of the so-called Centers for Biological Evaluation and Research, or CBER, said no. He basically went back on a deal that they had made in writing. That sent a chilling effect to the pharmaceutical industry. And then there was enormous pressure for him to change, including from his own staff, including from senior members of his own staff. And with that, he changed his mind 2 weeks later, and ultimately he left the FDA. So they are, as far as I know, they are reviewing, the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee and the FDA itself are reviewing those data. But my understanding is this vaccine could well be available by September. It's a new technology, right? The technology we used to make flu vaccine before was either egg-based,
Right.
mammalian cell-based, or recombinant DNA-based. And you're right; those that's a longer production cycle, closer to 6 months. This is a 3-month production cycle. So if there's a new variant that comes up, you much more quickly react to that.
Right. And that was the case with COVID-19, because we were all very concerned. I remember being in the hospital pronouncing people every day on different floors who were dying of the Delta variant of the COVID vaccine. We said, is there going to be a vaccine? And we all knew that it took 4 to 5, sometimes 10 years to develop an antiviral vaccine. And bingo, along comes the messenger RNA vaccine. So the vaccine that I received, that my colleagues received, was the standard flu vaccine, the one of old that, I hope I'm right, because nobody told me it was a messenger RNA vaccine. That was not available for me, an older individual, an older adult, at the time I received it, which was about 3 months ago.
Yeah, you could have gotten a flu block, which because I don't know how old you are, but if you were of an age where you're recommended to receive a higher dose vaccine,
Right.
I think you said super duper dose. Yeah, so higher dose, it's like
Exactly.
3 times the dose. Then you could have gotten either that vaccine or another vaccine that is a high dose vaccine. So that's what I get. I get the high dose flu vaccine. But,
Yeah,
I'm
do too.
telling you, the data on the mRNA vaccine, at least as far as I've seen, look very good. And if it's available in September, and the data still look that good, I'll get that vaccine.
Do we have any data regarding side effects like myocarditis or thromboses? And by the way, the platelet factor 4 isn't that the mechanism that the antibody to that is the mechanism with Coumadin toxicity, if I'm not mistaken?
That could be, yeah, because that clearly was the clotting issue with J&J's vaccine.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's talk about the ethical boundaries in the time we have left. The ethical boundaries when it comes to mandating vaccines. Where should society draw the line between the public good and personal choice? Now, let me go specifically. I already mentioned the Hasidic Jewish Orthodox group that doesn't believe in vaccinating. I've talked about the Seventh-day Adventists, and doubtless there are probably many, many groups out there, and measles has popped up in these selected populations and it killed children and a few adults, as that matter. Where do we stand with regard to ethical boundaries? What do you recommend, that we mandate vaccines, or we stand back and say, okay, you can get all the measles you want. If you want to fly to Australia and give the people in Sydney a new group of measles infected children, what the world has shrunk. We've contracted. We can go from one end of the planet to the other in no time, and we can carry pathogens with us. And that was the case with Ebola, and the fear of Lassa fever virus, for example, was another one. How do you feel about the ethics and the ethical boundaries of proposing people get vaccinated by mandate? Because it's a public health issue. And, it's not just you who are infected and not vaccinated. You're affecting countless other people, especially, we can use measles as an example. At an airport terminal, for example, one infected child can infect everybody in the terminal because of the infective nature of that respiratory transmission.
And that's the current tension. I mean, the current tension is the so-called medical freedom movement, versus public health. In the medical freedom movement, people say, I will do what I want to do, and I believe that will be best for myself and my family. In the public health realm, you make recommendations for a community, for a general community. So, I mean, if you step on a rusty nail and you go to the doctor and the doctor says they want you to get a tetanus vaccine and you don't get it, you get tetanus, no one's going to catch tetanus from you. It's not a contagious disease.
Right.
But measles is a contagious disease, as you note. And so is it your right to catch and transmit a potentially fatal infection, knowing that there are people who can't be vaccinated because they're getting chemotherapy for their cancers or they're getting immune suppressive therapy for their autoimmune diseases? They depend on you to protect them. So when you talk about medical freedom, freedom for whom? Freedom for you, maybe, but not freedom. You're taking away other people's freedom. I mean, if you have a child with cancer who's now going to a classroom where a large percentage of those children aren't vaccinated, you're taking away that child's freedom. And so I see it as enormously selfish. I mean, there are countries like Finland or Norway that have very high vaccine rates, right, without mandates. I mean, because those people generally, people in those Scandinavian countries, trust the government They trust public health officials. I know it's hard to believe that that exists anywhere, but it exists there. This is a country that was founded on individual rights and freedoms, and it's individual above all. And I think we suffer that because you're a member of society, act like it. You benefit from society, act like it. And I find it's enormously selfish in the end to do that.
I agree with you. I agree with you. So you think that society should, and I mean, especially in America, where we have concern for our fellow man. I mean, it's a democracy and agreed certain groups, can agree and have free speech, et cetera. But this is beyond free speech, free action. This is really concern for your fellow citizens. And this is really, I see this as a very, very important public good. And it's not necessarily only a personal choice. So what do you think the government should do and private institutions? How can they ensure vaccine equity? And now let me talk about two specific groups. So in the healthcare industry, as I mentioned, we all have to be vaccinated in order to work. In the armed forces, you remember, and this was taken to task by Kennedy and his associates, that if you didn't get vaccinated as a GI, you were either fired or dishonorably discharged. How do you feel about that?
I think if you're in the Army, you're in barracks, and in barracks can be as many as 60 people in one barrack, and that puts you at risk of certain diseases, at greater risk than other people because you're in that environment. Also, readiness. I think wartime readiness means that the degree to which your group is sick is the degree to which you are less ready. I mean, it was George Washington that really insisted on smallpox vaccination for that reason.
That's right.
So
That's right.
There's a long history for this.
We forget about that, George Washington and smallpox.
Right. So I think that in a better world, you shouldn't need mandates. In a better world, people get good information. And I mean, I think I am fully informed about vaccines. And so I'm vaccinated. My children, not surprisingly, are vaccinated. And so if you're well informed about vaccines, you don't need mandates. But unfortunately, there's a lot of bad information out there that causes people to make bad decisions that put not only themselves, but others at risk. You have a surgeon general now in Florida that's trying to take away school vaccine mandates. Good luck.
Right. That's
I mean,
right.
if there's a measles outbreak, because that is an important tool that you have in controlling that kind of outbreak. And if you give up that tool, this is the most contagious virus of humans is measles. That's why you see it's always the first one that comes roaring back when vaccine rates fray.
I think we should make it very clear that this is not a political discussion, but this is public health. And unfortunately, the FDA, CDC, NIH has been politicized. I'm going to say that right up front because that is a truth. And regardless of your political leanings, this is a very, very important concern. So let me ask you, we'll switch gears a little bit and talk about communication with patients. How do you suggest that physicians talk to patients who fear vaccines? Because there's a lot of them out there. And every time I bring up a booster to an elderly patient, somebody who's on immunosuppressive therapy, and that happens to be an area that I work in, autoimmune disease, they say, oh, do you really think I need this? Do you really think I should have this? What are the chances of my dying? What do you say to people like that?
So if you're an elderly patient, you are at high risk of certain diseases like respiratory syncytial virus, which causes
Right.
tens and tens of thousands of hospitalizations in the elderly and thousands of deaths every year.
Right.
Same thing's true for COVID. Same thing's true for influenza. And the same thing's true for pneumococcus. So if I were advising an elderly patient, I would say, look, this is your chance of being hospitalized or killed by one of these viruses or this pneumococcus bacteria. You benefit from this infection, from this vaccine. If you don't get it, you're taking an unnecessary risk. And, there are no risk-free choices. There's just choices to take different risks. And this is the bad one. Protect yourself. That's what I would say, and go through the numbers. But, and I think the problem that we face is that we deal with numbers. and numbers are numbing. And it's like the old Stalin line: one death is a tragedy, and a million deaths is a statistic. I think we have to try and make it clear what these viruses look like when they infect you, what it feels like to be infected. With what it means to die from influenza, which is basically you die of suffocation, or
Right.
pneumococcal pneumonia, or RSV pneumonia. It's you die of suffocation essentially. It's a brutal death,
Right.
and an unnecessary death.
Right. It's a horrible area. And we have patients that come in and say, should I be, especially the elderly, should I be immunized against shingles? It's painful, they say, and it's 2 shots that have to be several months apart. How do you advise the elderly population of that injection and the fact that they're going to have a little pain after the vaccination?
Right, you're right. So the Shingrix vaccine is a 2-dose vaccine, and it has a significant side effect. I mean, you can have, pain at the site of injection, swelling at the site of injection, and, fever, and it's not an easy vaccine. On the other hand, get shingles if you want to see what's really
Yeah,
painful.
it
I mean,
is.
it
Oh
is
my
one of the
God.
worst pains in medicine. People commit suicide with shingles. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
that's
that
right.
bad. It's right up there with labor and delivery and corneal abrasions as the worst pains in medicine. It's interesting you brought up earlier the father of modern vaccines to me, Maurice Hilleman, who
Yes.
was a tough guy. He was in the army. He grew up in rural Montana. He was a tough guy. And the only
Yes.
time I ever heard him complain towards the end of his life was when he had shingles. It
Oh,
really,
yeah.
really is painful.
It,
And if there's a way to avoid it, and this vaccine provides a way to avoid it, an excellent way. It's more than 90% effective, even for an elderly population, which is pretty good for a vaccine. The
right.
shingles, so that vaccine is clearly of value. I think so. So what you should have is you should have people talking about what it feels like to have shingles.
Right, right. And the other vaccine that I wanted to mention was, of course, hepatitis. And then a third was the papillomavirus vaccine, which is now, correct me if I'm wrong, being given to teenagers, both male and female. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah. So the cancers, of the thousands of cancers that occur every year, head, neck, anal, and genital cancers, about a third are in boys and men, and the other 2/3 are in women. It's the only known cause of cervical cancer, and it's preventive. And so HPV vaccine was first used in this country in 2008. And since we've used it, we have more than a 60% decrease in cervical cancer. Thank you, HPV vaccine. It's
That's
been a
extraordinary.
godsend.
That's extraordinary. And if you're out there listening to this, take this to the bank because this is important information that you will get probably nowhere else. Please like and subscribe to Health Frontiers with Dr. Bob. I'm interested in hearing from you, and I'm interested in your comment section below in this show. So I guess we're going to wrap this up by saying to you right now, the thing that concerns everybody that talks about vaccines, at least the pediatrics group, which you are an expert, is the methods for engaging pediatric populations or parents that have little kids who are hesitant about giving their children a vaccine. Your final thoughts on that?
I think we just have to be compassionate and realize that it is a scary time out there. People don't see these diseases like they used to. They are flooded with a ton of readily available, terrible information from social media or from friends, and realize that, and just do the best we can to try and convince people. I actually have watched my wife, who's in general pediatrics, go through this, and she used to just do the best she could. Get one vaccine at a time and try the next time, and then she basically had it, and she said, "Let me love your child.
Yes.
Please don't put me in a position where you're asking me to send this child out of this office when I know that there are bacteria like pneumococcus out there, or Hib out there, or meningococcus out there, when I know that there are viruses like respiratory syncytial virus or flu out there or COVID out there that could cause the child to suffer serious harm. Please don't put me in that position. Please let me love your child." And with that, she became far more convincing.
Yeah, I think that's hitting the nail right on the head. It's your child's health. And it is a safe process. And you've heard it here through Dr. Offit experts. Immunologists and infectious disease experts all agree that your child should get vaccinated. And for those of you who are watching who are elderly and worried about booster shots, get your boosters, get your Shingrix vaccine for shingles. It'll really go a long way. Do you have any parting words for our audience? And I'm sure they're going to be glued to this. This is a fantastically interesting program and a very education segment.
Yeah, I think people believe, understandably, that they can educate themselves, and that's fine. I'm just saying what you should do is you should go to those sites that are responsible sites. I mean, either hospital-based, university-based. I mean, we have a Vaccine Education Center, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. There's a lot of good information out there. The problem is there's a lot of bad information out there.
That's right.
And the trick is distinguishing the two. At least stay away from those sites that are selling something. That's probably one clue as to the fact that they may have a bias.
That's right. And I was on national news recently talking about Dr. Google, and that people go to ChatGPT or Dr. Google and ask questions and often get misinformation, because that misinformation or that information in general is culled from not only the popular literature, but also the modest scientific literature. So be careful and don't go to Dr. Google. Go to your physician, your pediatrician. Any last thoughts, Dr. Offit, for our audience before we sign off?
Hang in there. We'll get through this. Although the politics might change, the science never does.
Thank you very much for being with us today. We've had a wonderful time. And again, please like and subscribe to Health Frontiers with Dr. Bob, and leave us your comments. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of comments on this show. I'd like to thank Dr. Paul Offit for taking the effort to be with us for almost an hour today to discuss the importance of vaccines and vaccinating not only your children, but your parents, your in-laws, everybody in the family should be covered. Very, very important. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us on Health Frontiers. I hope today's episode provided valuable insights into your well-being. Remember, this podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, but a source of knowledge and guidance. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please reach out. Make sure to like, subscribe, and visit our website at www.healthfrontierspod.com. Join us next time as we continue our quest to uncover the latest in health and wellness. Stay healthy and empowered. Until next time, I'm Dr. Bob.